Hey, just wanted to do a quick little review of Promise Me Joe. This is a book written by a politician, Joe Hunter Biden. This is obviously a senator for some time, and now he's going to be the president of the United States, which is very exciting. For a good amount of time, I thought it might be a nice thing to read the book from the president, so I got Donald Trump's Art of the Deal, but I didn't get around to reading it, unfortunately. And now that we have a new president, I thought I'd jump the gun and read this book, hopefully get an insight into this guy's life. And I'm really happy I did. This is a wonderful book. I'm going to say it, I definitely felt things when I read this book. I cried at points. It is, it's not very straightforward in the beginning about what it's about, but I can say that in summary, it's basically it's about this guy's son who's having a battle with cancer, and there are parallels to that battle with cancer at the same time as Joe is playing an instrumental role in a battle in Iraq. And so there's this sort of war. There's, what did I say? I said it's a story of the Iraq war and the hospital ward at the same time. This sort of back and forth as he's dealing with these problems um, in tandem. So this book is also read by Joe, which is a little bit different, right? The audiobook, he reads it himself. I don't think he is like an ideal reader. I read this book at 3 times speed, maybe 2.7. And so he has a very wet, soft voice, which does not do well when it's, punched to high gear at 3 times speed. But um, there are times where it was worth it because there's some moments where you could see his voice is like starting to crack. He's starting to get really emotional, and you could really you could feel that that texture, that sentiment. It really comes through in his voice, and that's a really powerful moment, particularly when he's talking about his son and all the trials that kid's going through. Kid, the guy's like 30 something, right? This guy has had a pretty tragic life, a Keanu Reeves kind of backstory with his first wife and child died in a tragic accident, and now his son's on the hospital ward, right, dealing with cancer. So this guy's dealt with a lot of shit, and he does a really good job of, I think, explaining just sort of what he's going through. It's really a peek into like how he's doing in like 1 or 2 years time, following these diary entries that he's written at some period, which I think is a wonderful device. I mean, learning about this character, I feel like there's a lot assumed that I know about this guy. I don't know anything about this guy, and I understand, having lived in the public life for since he was 26, he may take some things for granted, but I really have no idea what his backstory is. And so this stuff about his dead wife, I didn't know any of that going into the book, and I do think readers are going to be at a disadvantage if they haven't just read maybe Cliff Notes on this guy, because I think he takes a little bit too many assumptions on knowing who he is. But what's really fun about this book too is it is, of course, a nonfiction piece, and it's also rather current. So I think it's wonderful just to hear stories about Vladimir Putin and some of these world leaders who are still making a huge impact today. And obviously, it's about this guy who's now going to be the president. So it's wonderful to see how he thinks about the world and imagine how that's going to affect his tenure in the role. So I'm excited about that. The text is beautifully written, very well written. Maybe he's just a great writer on his own. I'm sure he is, or perhaps he had some great speech writers help him out. But there is just some real moments that I think were wonderful. I love this quote where he says, "If the problem is fear, the antidote or the answer is knowledge." So he wants to fight fear with knowledge. That's sort of a recurring thing throughout the book, where he's one of the main issues that he's facing with this cancer problem is they don't understand it too well. And I think that is it's interesting, but I think to some degree he goes into a little bit too much detail about the cancer stuff, often going into the exact medical jargon relating to it. And, at points he's like, I lost myself in this jargony soup. I don't understand what it is, and I'm not a brain surgeon, right? But at other times, he really goes into far too much detail for the average reader, who's probably not going to really give a shit what exact kind of cancer his son had. Um, it suffice to say the guy had cancer. You know what I mean? Um, that's the funny thing, though, right? When you get cancer, you become an expert at your kind of cancer because you're googling every goddamn thing you can about that cancer because you want to know how it's going to affect your life. And I'm sure it's the same thing as if when your kid gets cancer. And I think a little bit too much of that obsession fell into the book where we don't really need that information. TMI. There's a subplot as well about how the hospitals have these antiquated technology, and he keeps saying, he's like, the hospitals have this antiquated technology, we gotta fix that. But he never goes back to it in the book. It's just sort of like a problem, I guess, that is still plaguing hospitals today. It's sort of an unresolved thread. And then there are moments in the book where in the audiobook particularly, where Joe's voice stops and a new reader comes in with a different voice. Sounds kind of like him, but the guy reads things differently. So I guess what happened was Joe just skipped over sentences, or maybe he pronounced it in a weird way, and they decided they needed to re-record that section, but they couldn't get Joe to do it. They had to get a new guy. I don't know. It's just a little bit foolish. I thought one moment was really resonant with me, where he talks. He's constantly saying the guy's gone, right? In this idea that he has gone away, and that it's sort of a euphemism that people are talking about when somebody's died, and he has this beautiful, because he has so many people in his life who are now dead, as is the case for most of us as we get older. But this guy particularly, he's got some tragedy, right? And so he has this beautiful vignette he paints of his family members on a distant shoreline, and they are welcoming the death of a close family member of his. So when this person dies, he says, yes, they're going away, but he imagines being on the other side of the river as these deceased family members. And he's saying, no, it's not just that he's going away, it's that he's coming to us. And he imagines that they're not going away into this distant unknown, but instead into the warm, accepting arms of family members in some sort of afterlife. And I thought that was a beautiful picture that was very well designed. So overall, I would totally recommend this book for somebody who's interested in the mind of Joe Biden, to sort of see what's going on in that guy's head, and to see how he views the world. And I think just as a book itself, again, you do need to come in with a little bit of knowledge, but I was able to cry, so I certainly felt something. I didn't sob, I didn't bawl, but I did shed a tear or two, and I think that happens rarely enough that I can be very grateful for when it happens. So this book is going to be a 4 out of 5. It's going to be a recommendation from me. And if you've read this book, I'd love to know what you thought about it, because I think it's a wonderful little piece of literature. And I don't know any other books by this author, but if he has other stuff, I would certainly consider it. I'd love to see what his early life was like, sort of before he became a senator, or even in his rise up through the powers of Washington to become the powerful vice president. And now he's the president, right? That's the biggest role in the office. So I'd love to hear what that experience is going to be like for him, and projecting into the future, what difficulties and challenges that might bring for our protagonist. Very exciting time, of course, for this character. And yeah, I'd love to know, if you read this book, what you think about it, because that's one of the best parts about BookTube, as they call the YouTubers who review books. It's a pleasure to see what other people are thinking as well. All right, I'll chat with you guys later.